and I can go ahead and edit it later.
Sure.
So today in The Conspiracy of Hope, we are talking with Dan Lowenstein. And Dan is incredibly impressive outwardly, like on paper. He's also incredibly impressive inwardly. My experience with Dan was as a graduate student at UC San Francisco in the neuroscience program. He was my favorite professor because of the way he spoke to what was human in the room. And that made me just enamored of him forever. So recently our paths crossed again, and I'm excited to interview him for this book and for this series. And Dan, would you be willing to first introduce your sort of outward, um, everything that makes you so impressive outward, and then we'll choose sort of a superhero name for your inward features, like I do with all the guests.
Thanks, Julia. So yes, my name's Dan Lowenstein. I'm a professor of neurology in the School of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. And I've been practicing medicine for now 45 plus years, I think, um, and uh, have crafted a professional career, if you will, around trying to help people and their families living with epilepsy. So I've devoted a lot of time to trying to understand what the clinical aspects of epilepsy are, and then really to dive into the research in order to try to understand the biological underpinnings, with the goal of eventually, along with so many other people around the world, come up with effective therapies and cures. So that's been kind of my official professional life. I've also had the opportunity to get heavily involved in education, as you've already referred to. I love teaching and have helped with creating curricula for our students at UCSF. And most recently, I was asked to serve as the executive vice chancellor and provost at UCSF, which is something I wasn't seeking, but I was asked because I know UCSF so well, and been doing that for the last 8 years. Just stepped down last month, and that was a wonderful adventure in having the opportunity to work with the leadership of the university, and to try to make life good as we can for the people who work here and the people that we serve.
Okay, so let's start there. So I think by the end of the interview, we'll have a really good sense of what your inner superhero name is, but we're gonna get there. So let's start there. So you say you just stepped down and that you had an 8-year experience of serving this organization and that you love teaching, and all these are service-oriented pieces. Of course, being a doctor is also service-oriented. Doing research to epilepsy is also service-oriented. So the topic of these discussions is about this idea that it may seem that there's a conspiracy sort of misery or darkness in the world. It may seem that there's groups of people who are uh, connected to something that tells them like, it's just everything's a disaster and there's nothing good that I can do. There's no service that I can do that will actually work. But in fact, is another way to look at that is that there's actually a conspiracy of hope. So this idea that some people are connected to this experience of, wait, here's an opportunity for me to be of service. Wait, I have the capacity to do this. And so I'm going to do this because it's going to make people's lives better. And so that's what I see in you. That's what I see in everyone in the book. And so I just would love to just deep dive into how does it work in you that you can both hold, and I'm going to take this from the Talmud and also from one of the things you've said, that you can hold in one hand, um, I am a humble servant, essentially. I'm doing the work that I can do because I can do it, and it needs to be done. And in the other hand, I can do this work. I'm strong enough and I'm good enough to be effective at this work. So this is the big struggle for people, right? like, like I have this value, and yet I don't have to be egoic about it. And so can we talk about that? Because that seems to me like a puzzle that you've solved. I don't know if it was conscious or not.
Mm, mm. Well, I love the avenue of thinking that you're sharing. I love it. So uh, I'm going to get very personal.
Great.
I'm assuming you're not going to mind, and that your
It's
readers
good.
won't mind.
No.
Um, and I have, uh, and I'll be brief, but there are three stories that come to mind immediately that are part of the answer. Um, to whatever degree I've solved this dilemma that you've so well described. So the first story comes from when I was 11, 12 years old or so, growing up in New Jersey. My parents, middle class family, loving education was the most important thing. But thank goodness they were willing to send me off to summer camp. and and the first couple of summers, it was 2 weeks. But after the second summer, I came home and I said, Mom, Dad, I would love to go to camp for the whole summer, because there were 8 weekers who would go there for 2 months. And they let me go.
Mm.
And it was phenomenal experience for me. It had so much to do with my recognition of, different ways of looking at life. And uh, one of the most important memories for me was at the end of the 8 weeks. I was in the same cabin with the same counselor. There were different kids who may have rotated in, but Jack was my counselor, and he was like a god to me. He probably couldn't have been, a month over 22 years old, but he just seemed like he was the coolest dude I'd ever met. He played guitar and he sang and he did cool things. And he was a wonderful friend. And the night before the end of camp, when parents were coming up to pick us up, um, Jack and I went to the fields behind the cabins, and it was a beautiful summer evening in New Jersey. And we just lay on the ground and we're looking up at the Milky Way, and the stars were just as brilliant as could be, and the occasional shooting star. And I was just so content and happy. And Jack said, Dan, your heart is as big as this sky. And, I remember the story, Julia, because the message must have come into me somehow. I didn't realize it at the moment, but I think that um, that helped me have a deep belief that I, like all humans, have big hearts.
Mm.
Yeah. So that's been part of me, is a belief anyway, that we have the capacity to have a big heart, and I have one. Okay.
Can I interrupt you before story two?
Yeah.
I noticed something when you were telling that story, which is that I braced myself. This 22-year-old is taking you behind the area and
Yeah.
looking
Yeah.
up at the stars. I braced myself for some horrible story of molestation or something. And
Yeah.
that's because of this conspiracy of dread, sort of, right? That exists in the narrative. Like nothing good can happen here. But in
Yeah.
fact, this amazing transmission of wisdom happened there.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
anyway, I just wanted to point out that's how active this stuff is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about that dread line too when I say that phrase of we went up to the fields behind the cabin. So
Right.
yeah. Um, so the second story has to do with my mom. About 7 or 8 years ago now, she was out here to join us in the celebration of our graduation from our daughter Mira from University of California, Irvine. And
Mazel tov.
thank you. And my mom is a social worker. She escaped from Germany, as did my father. They met in New York, raised us in New Jersey. She was a social worker that ended up doing home health aid work, took care of my father when he developed ALS, and then volunteered after he passed away, and continued to do various kinds of volunteer activities. So she was out here. We were down in SoCal, and I could tell she wasn't looking that well. And we sat down, the two of us alone, and she said, there's something going on. My belly feels uncomfortable. I've talked to my primary care doctor, and they're doing some tests, and I've been her counsel for medical issues over the years, and we agreed that she would let me know what the test looked like. So she went home. About 2 weeks later, she sent me an email with an image from her ultrasound. I called her up, and it was very clear that she had metastatic cancer of some sort because her liver was filled with mets. And we both immediately agreed this is serious. And my mom said, Dan, I don't want anything done. And I wasn't surprised when she said that, because she and I have always had an agreement that we would look out for one another in that kind of circumstance, and that we would be very careful to not have, things done to us that we didn't feel were proper. And I said, Mom, let's at least get another opinion here. Let's find out more about what kind of cancer this is. And she agreed. And I did what we do within academia, as I called up my friend, Francis Jensen, the chair of neurology at Penn, and said, Francis, my mom's got some kind of GI cancer. Can you recommend someone there in Philly for her to go see? And 2 weeks later, my mom and my sister, a nurse, Vivian, who lives in Philly, and I walked into the office of Dr. Ursina Teitelbaum, a GI geriatric oncologist. And Dr. Teitelbaum proceeded to listen to my mom's story. And after about 20 minutes, after having also looked at all the lab tests and thought about the potential therapeutic options, she looked at my mom and said, Mrs. Lowenstein, based on everything that you've said, I really do think that the best thing is for us to consider putting you in hospice, because I don't think that the therapies that we have to offer are what you would want. And as we were walking out from the doctor's office that day, she put her arms around my sister and me, and she said, that was the best doctor I've ever met. So that was in midsummer, and over the course of the next 4 or 5 months, she slowly deteriorated, and we brought the kids back to see her in New Jersey. She would cook us wonderful Sunday brunches, as she did when we were growing up, and it was so ironic because she's an incredible cook, but she couldn't enjoy it anymore. But the other thing that I didn't mention yet is that she lived in a retirement community. She had her own home, but it was a couple hundred yards from the central facility that had a dining hall and also had a nursing unit. And my mom had been volunteering over the years for all sorts of activities there. I mean, she was the chair of the dining hall committee, and she did social work services for people, and she was helping people in hospice as a social worker.
Perfect.
And so she kept doing that work,
Right.
even though she was so ill. And we talk every week. Well, finally, in early November, I called her up, and I could detect a change in her voice. And she said, Danny, that's the way she called me. I just it's just become impossible. It's taken me 2 hours to get dressed and to care for myself, and my back hurts more than ever, and I know I'm not going to be able to walk over to the central facility and do the things that I want to do there. I don't want to live anymore. And it was as clear as could be. And we had talked about the options that one could have when one decided not to continue living. And she and her doctor and the rest of the team around her had made sure that there were ways that she could be cared for under that circumstance. And a few days later, my sister called and said, Dan, you got to come. You got to come. Mom's dying. And I took a night flight and joined my sister, and we're at her bedside holding her hand as she took her last breath. And I realized then and there, Julia, that I had never really thought that I'd had a mentor in life. I've had plenty of people that I've counted on for advice and been given direction, but I would have never said that I had a mentor until my mom passed away. And it was, if she could no longer be of service to other people, life was no longer worth living. So the third story, I'm going to be brief. I know you know this, and it's very personal, but it's so relevant to the question that we're exploring. And that has to do with the loss of our son, Alex. So we've been blessed with 3 children, Alex, Stefan, and Mira, our daughter. And I could go on and on about the meaning of our family and those relationships, and the extraordinary qualities of each one of our children. Alex is the oldest, was an adventurer. He loved the outdoors. I taught him climbing and mountaineering. We were mountaineering partners along the way, and until he easily began to excel beyond what I was capable of. And he did many, many adventures around the world. And at the age of 24, he died from a terrible accident. And I've talked about this publicly. As you know, I put together a lecture to the UCSF community now about 8 or 9 years ago, in which I talked about various aspects of life, but I focused in part on this experience of losing our son. And the reason I want to bring it up is that for me, it gets at the heart of this question of how do we balance the dreaded aspects of life, to use the word that you've used, with a sense of hope and joy and sustained fulfillment. And when the world became absolute black, when we, my wife and I, and the rest of our loving circle, was consumed by complete darkness, there was nothing else there in the moment. But very quickly, there was the tinge of something different than darkness. And it was a lightness that was fueled by the feeling of love that was being placed on us, focused on us. There's
You
a
had
better
access to it somehow.
yeah. There's a better
Yeah.
word.
Yeah.
But between the telephone conversations, between the hugs, between my best friend Tim immediately coming out from New Hampshire to be with me for a month, and even the unspoken, unheard words and thoughts, they were all coming from a place of love. And that's what's lifted me out of that complete darkness. And so over the course of the last now 12 and a half years, the color of the world has come back, not fully. Or if it is full, it's not continuous. There are times when the sheen sort of shakes or things get a little bit grayscale. But the source of that change has been, without any question, our capacity to love. Yeah.
What do you call that? I can feel what you're talking about and also sympathize or empathize or whatever with your difficulty finding the right word for that verb of how somehow it's channeled to you or something. What do you call that what do you call that source? Do you have a name for that source? Because it's not a human source, right? Like it's not like, I don't think it's a human source.
How do you mean? You mean
I mean,
You mean,
like you're talking about this love that you became fully embedded in. Let's say that.
well, I get it's more, uh, it's more feeling, sensing, knowing that there's 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 an aspect of our existence which is sustaining, and and thank God, thank God exists, because I couldn't live in a world without. I mean, it when Alex passed away, there wouldn't have been a reason for me to want to live on if I didn't have the belief, if I didn't regain the belief, because in the instant everything was gone. But very quickly, that belief that I've always had, goes back to summer camp, right? It was erased instantaneously, and in the minutes and hours, it was chaos. But early on, um, there was that rekindling of a spark that that was going in the right direction, that the world, we have the capacity to love, and that's what makes life worth living. I guess it's as simple as that.
Okay, so the
Yeah.
belief is the belief that you that went away but then very quickly came back is that there is good, right? That there is good and that love is what makes life worth living. Is that
Yeah, and
yeah,
it didn't come back like, a step function, and didn't,
yeah.
it was very, very gradual, and that's why I've always felt, through observation of the losses of others, but also my own, is that time, time, has an amazing, amazing healing quality to it, and I think that one of the reasons is that it gives us the opportunity to get reconnected with the other parts of the world that have been, certainly in the moment, completely ablated by the horror of of the losses that we experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's ironic because just to get nerdy about time, it's ironic because without the existence of time, so if everything happened at once, there would be no loss of those other things. Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it
exactly.
causes the ablation and then it heals the ablation.
Yeah,
That's pretty that's just very much like God.
yeah, yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Very thank you. Beautiful. So the superhero name that has come up for me, we got to work on this if you don't like it, because I want you to like it, is Rabbi-Doctor Big Sky.
Sure, whatever. I mean, I'm not attached to names or whatever, so if it feels good for you, that's fine.
I like it, Rabbi-Doctor Big Sky. Yeah, because you're very rabbinical, you know,
Mm,
for a doctor,
mm,
right? Oh, that's why that goes first.
okay.
And in terms of the reminding people of what's really important, and you bring that into your work. We didn't talk about it much, but you bring that into your work, and you bring it into your work without trying.
Mm.
So I think it's the substrate. It seems to me you don't try. Do you try? It seems to me it's natural.
Yes, it's natural.
Yeah, yeah. That's just the substrate. And so and then the big sky because of the expansiveness internally.
Mm,
The big sky in your heart,
mm.
you know. So, all right, Rabbi-Doctor Big Sky, thank you very much.
Well, that's great. If I ever, well, I'm not going to be able to hike the Pacific Crest Trail this lifetime, but when you do, you're supposed to have a trail name, and boy,
Hmm.
that would have been. It's a little long for the PCT, but I think I would have used it. That's good.
Awesome. Well, that's a compliment. Is there anything you want to say to people before we close out? Just any advice you have for anyone on the planet who's having trouble connecting with exactly what you were able to connect with, and they're hoping to connect with it in less dramatic ways.
Mm,
I don't know if that's possible, but
mm.
you know,
Well, it should be. I think uh, yes, I would wish on all of us that there was a way for us to find our truth, without going through, the experiences that life, some of the horrible experiences that life brings, to all of us in one way or another. I guess I'll also mention that uh, I've I feel fortunate that for whatever reason, spiritual practice has been an important emphasis for me in my life. And I raised as a Jew, but have never been able to really relate to the belief system of organized religion. Although I love the traditions of Judaism, and still practice some of them. But I uh, I my belief system is very much rooted in the philosophy of the Buddha. So that, I mean, I just, that is my interpretation of life, in which, he teaches that, sadly, life is filled with suffering, but uh, our capacity to find joy and fulfillment is to understand the nature of suffering, and therefore be liberated from it. And it's an incredibly challenging task, but liberation involves, among other things, the ability to not have one's sense of joy and fulfillment be dependent on attachment to things that can be taken away. And if we just sit back and think about what in our life, is impermanent and what is not, there aren't many things that are permanent,
yeah,
and that includes our uh, our job, our relationship with others, even the ongoing existence of a child. Um, but one thing that is permanent is our capacity to love. Um, so I guess my advice to all of us is to pay attention to, the advice of sages, over the millennia, who have emphasized the importance of spiritual grounding. There's a reason for it, and it's not meant primarily for when life is going swimmingly well. Yeah.
yeah. We come onto it when we need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. You're very touching to me. Your work is very touching to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julia.